The Larry Beinhart, I wrote a chapter about this in my book, Rebooting the American Dream. And there's also a fairly extensive discussion of this in my book, Threshold. We have tax policy for two purposes. There's two reasons why we have tax policies. And the most important of those two reasons is not to raise revenue for the federal government. That's something that taxes do. And it's an important thing that taxes do. When Sam Brownback cut taxes on rich people in Kansas, Kansas took in less money. In fact, Kansas is nearly broke right now because of Sam Brownback's Reaganomics experiment there, just like the United States is now, quote, broke, or at least badly in debt because of 34 years of a Reaganomics experiment here in the United States, nationwide. But the most important reason why you have tax policy is not to raise money, it's to alter behavior. Government actually does modify behavior. There are behaviors that we want to encourage, and there are behaviors that we want to discourage. And this isn't, some group of liberals or conservatives, for that matter, sitting in an ivory tower saying, "Oh, gee, we should do this or that." But it's just the practical stuff. What is the appropriate role of government? What should we be doing, and how do we encourage that kind of? And what kind of behaviors do we want? We want fewer people to smoke tobacco. Back 40 years ago, cigarettes were, 20, 30, 40 cents a pack. Now they're $4, $5, $6, whatever they are. They're very expensive. Why? Because, hey, 400 to 500,000 Americans die every year because of tobacco. So you want to reduce the number of people doing that. How do you do it? You raise the taxes on it. It's fairly straightforward. One of the other things that we don't want people doing is gambling with hot money. Because when people, and by gambling, I'm talking about gambling on the stock market, gambling in the housing market, gambling in the derivatives market. When rich people find that after the first $400,000 a year, which they can get at a fairly low tax rate, after that, the top tax rate goes up above 50%. And this is the research that Larry Beinhart did, that he's been on this program a couple of times talking about. It's just brilliant stuff. What happens when you have that low top tax rate? When the people at the very top are not paying a lot of taxes, so they can easily pull money out of their businesses, out of their corporations, like the head of United Healthcare making over $1 billion. Right? Two of the last two presidents, the last two CEOs. What happens is then they start taking that money and saying, it wasn't hard to get this $100 million. So instead of putting it in a safe investment, in a conservative investment, in a cautious investment, I'm going to throw caution to the wind because, hey, easy come, easy go, and invest it in high-risk bonds or invest it in derivatives or give it to hedge fund managers, things that have a potential upside of 10, 20, 30, 40% return in a year when, if you simply put it in the bank, you might get 1.5%. I'm going to do that instead of something more cautious. And the result of that always, in every country around the world with a large enough economy to have their own stock markets, always is that when taxes on the really rich are above 50%, you have long-term periods of economic stability and market stability and banking system stability. And when the top tax rate drops below 50%, and once again, John Kennedy never suggested it should go below 50%. When the top tax rate goes below 50%, then what you have is bubbles and bursts, boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust. These cycles that tend to run 6, 8, 10, 12-year cycles of, it's how long it takes to inflate a bubble and then to collapse a bubble, and then to inflate another bubble and then collapse a bubble. And so we have been seeing since the Reagan tax cuts went into place. We saw the dot-com bubble. First, we saw a bubble in the S&L industry, and then that burst. There was the biggest stock market crash in 1987 during the Reagan administration in the history of the United States, other than the one that led up to the Great Depression. There was a big stock market crash as a consequence of this, and then we went into the 90s, and we had the dot-com bubble, and that popped in 2000. And then hey, it wasn't a stock market bubble anymore. Now it was a real estate bubble because Phil Gramm had deregulated banking. And so the banksters could take real estate mortgages and take $1 million worth of mortgages and turn it into $1 trillion worth of derivatives by betting on betting on betting. And so, a few $billion or a few $100 billion worth of, really bad mortgages, bad paper, became the basis, the value, the underlying value out of which was derived these bets. They're called derivatives because they derive their value from something underneath them. So we had $800 trillion worth of derivatives going into the great crash in 2008. $800 trillion. Keep in mind, the GDP of the entire planet is $65 trillion. The GDP of the United States is $15 trillion. We had $800 trillion worth of derivatives. All funny money. Why? Because who's going to buy this stuff? People whose top tax rate is low and whose income is high. It's why we need to change the top tax rate.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
We need to just acknowledge it. Reaganomics has been a spectacular failure. It has destroyed America. It's time to repeal it.